Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Well, here we are. We're back in the chair. It is On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics Podcast. Dave Trafford here with you, along with Keith Leslie and John Wright. And I dare say we would normally have welcomed in Sabrina Nanji from the Queen's Park Observer, but apparently she'd rather sit in the dentist's chair than talk to us this morning. So that's where she's at.
Priorities.
But but here's the advantage. It just makes me feel a whole lot smarter because I can go to her newsletter and claim all this stuff for my own research and paying attention. So welcome in. There's lots to talk about, and not the least of which are a few developments vis-a-vis the pandemic updates. John, we're looking at a little bit of concern, nervousness, because we're beginning to see the 7-day rolling average, up around the 500 mark. That's of some worry. Every once in a while it spikes. I think yesterday, based on the recording here on Friday, I think we're up into the 700s here in Ontario. So yes, it's worrisome, but on the other hand, you start to look at the vaccine rates. You know what? Ontario might be one of the best jurisdictions in the world on all of this.
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the rates now, you're finding at least 40% of the people who are infected are actually people who are already double vaxxed. And maybe it's just now the beginnings of two things. The first being that this is the normal way in which we're going to see things going forward, that people get this. Because the real issue has been the second thing, and that is it clogging up our hospitals? Do we have people in ICUs? Do we have people who are, clogging up the healthcare system because of that? And so I think, Dave, I look at the 700 or the 600 or the 500 numbers now, and I feel it's a bit incomplete because I really want to be looking at the utilization rate of the hospitals. Mm-hmm. So if you had 800 people being tested, but you only had 150 in a hospital, then I think my perspective of this would be, well, it's just part of going forward. And I think with the booster shots that now people are going to be eligible for, and the kids, in short order, I think we may start to look at life that way and just sort of say it's moving forward in the way that we would expect it to live with this sort of thing going forward.
Yeah, Keith, it's funny. I'm eligible for the booster because I'm an AstraZeneca user, and so I went to the pharmacy the other day and I said, can we arrange this? And they said, yeah, just give us a call on Monday and we'll set you up. And I think it's the first week of December where I would be eligible. But what's interesting to me, I'm hearing more people saying, yeah, I'm going for my booster, and while I'm there, I'm going to get my flu shot. So there's more of a sense culturally that this is, to John's point, this is just going to become part of how we're going to manage this moving forward. I don't know why people get so wound up about, oh my God, you need to have a third shot. Yeah, and that's because we've recognized that that's what it takes to get this thing accomplished.
Yes.
That should be good news.
Look, if I ran science, the second shot would have also served as a flu shot. Apparently, it doesn't work that way. So when I went to get my flu shot last week, and I did, I said, when will I be back for the booster? He said, I'll be seeing you in January. And what's the big deal?
Right.
Here's your flu shot, hang around for 15 minutes, and then about your business. And just like with the other shots, this is making life, as close to normal as we can get at this point. So what is the issue? What's the problem? I don't understand it at all. I really do question, though, the government's new deal with Shoppers Drug Mart to have symptomatic patients or people with symptoms go to Shoppers to get a test. First of all, the rest of us that are going to a pharmacy or whatever don't really want to have to deal with that. And Shoppers also has a lot of post offices, and this is the one time of the year we actually go to the post office. I don't want to have to go there and know. The government had to get pushed, and eventually they said, it would be best if they had a separate entrance for these symptomatic patients. Well, they don't. They're not set up for that. So how on earth is it? This just seems like a really, really bad idea when they've had so many others. And apparently the individual Shoppers stores, which are individually owned, and they were all sent a survey, but they were told by corporate headquarters, don't bother filling out that survey. You're doing it.
So this whole thing kind of lends itself into the story that we were hearing this morning, John, and that is that the kids are going back to to school in the winter break, into the winter season, and the high school kids, it looks like they're going to have their semester system back, which is great for the kids. And I think, for a whole lot of reasons, that's a better way to teach it. Who wants to sit in a 3-hour Zoom meeting? Oh, wait, that's education. So there's a positive there. But the other side of this story is that the kids are going to be sent home for the Christmas holidays with rapid tests, and they're being told to do it every couple of days, starting on the 23rd of December. If you test positive, you have to have a PCR test, and presumably if that comes back positive, you can't go back to class in January. Here's where it breaks down. The rapid test isn't mandatory, period. So the kid that comes home and doesn't do any testing at all gets to go back to class whether he's sick or not. And in all of this, and this is where my head explodes, we have been told that the rapid tests are not that effective. There's too many, false positives, and all the results aren't all that reliable. Dr. Moore is quoted as saying, well, now because there are more cases in the community, this test becomes more reliable. And I'm paraphrasing. I don't get it. I don't know how more illness in the community makes this test more effective than it did when we had fewer cases. I don't get. There's so much confusion around this. I don't know. We've said this so many times on this. The suck and blow part of this comms strategy is incredible.
No, I have to admit that I have kids now who are in university. They're not even kids anymore, so I'm not close to the public scene. And so maybe someone who has children there would be able to explain it a lot easier. But from my perspective, if my kids were brought home with these rapid turnaround tests, the only difference would be that if I were a diligent and vigilant parent who wanted to know whether my kids had a sniffle that was more than that I could use this test as an assurance. I mean, they couldn't get a vaccine anyways unless they were over 12, which they would have had already. But if they're younger than that, the only other way I would have to deal with it, Dave, is that I'd have to go to the local pop-up, where you can buy one of these tests, the real deal test for about 100 and some odd bucks. Or you would have to actually have the symptoms and pay almost as much as I can recall, because I had to do it for one of my kids, where they kind of spit in a jar and you wait for a short period of time and it comes out and says whether you have it or not. So part of this, I think, is if somebody comes down with a cold in the house and it's the child, it gives peace of mind and maybe a bit of a warning as to whether they should go back or not. And if the more people who test positive in that, the less kids you get going back into school, the better it is. But to your point, I'm not sure how this all helps the system. I mean, there are lots of parents who may say, look, you're just going back to school. I'm not going to keep you home for a period of time because I want you in school, and there you go. This really comes down to the vigilance and the diligence of the individual parent and whether or not it's kind of their thing to make sure that they're feeling good that their child isn't carrying it.
Keith, it just kind of lends itself to this abdication of any kind of leadership on the file when it's low-hanging fruit. I mean, you're going to get a certain percentage of parents to say, I'm not testing my kids because I got whatever dorky idea rattling around in their brain. But for the most part, I think John's right. My grandkids have had tests probably 5 or 6 times in the last couple of months because they're in kindergarten and daycare. So parents are just doing it.
There's several areas we've seen where the leadership has been really sorely lacking, surprisingly lacking, when, as you say, it's the low-hanging fruit stuff. It's the stuff that the public polling shows, the overwhelming majority of people are on side with. And yet this government, whether it's, the vaccine mandates in hospitals or whether it's this, they're leaving it up to, parents to decide or employers to decide, when they had virtually every hospital write in and say, no, take this step. We're going to have to take this step. You take this step. It gives it more authority. That's the leadership that's needed. It's not that they don't know what needs to be done. The Premier is encouraging people to act that way, but he doesn't want to take that extra step and impose it. He doesn't want to show the leadership And that's what's required. That's what you do. Even heading into an election, you show the leadership. You take the tough decisions, even though you will be criticized for it. And some of the people that are opposed to these, whether it's a vaccine mandate or these, some are extremely vocal. And they're very persistent in getting their message across to the point where they're interrupting reporters live on the street. They're just being an annoyance. So, as a premier, show some leadership, stand up for them, and make it a provincial mandate so that these individual parents, individual schools, individual employers aren't left to come in and, they're taking the heat. Why? If they're enacting provincial regulations or provincial orders, it just makes life a lot easier. And that's the leadership that is, as I say, has just been clearly lacking. And I don't even understand why. As you say, it's the easy ones to do.
Well, we're back to the suck and blow, because in long-term care, John, they initiated this requirement for workers in long-term care to get their vaccines. And it turns out that only 12 homes in the province required some staffing assistance. That's not a lot, considering the number of homes in this province. The second part of it is, it would have been easy to say, you know what, 9 out of 10 people have already done this. We're going to make it a requirement. And if you've got issues, bring it up. But here are the very explicit issues that we're going to be able to deal with. And here's what we're doing to make sure that we don't have staffing problems. So they've already shown that it works in long-term care. I don't get it. On the one hand, it works. On one hand, geez, we don't want to be going there. Who are you today?
Well, I guess, you're right. This whole file to me is muddled. It used to be fairly clear, and it was get a shot, don't go to work. Up until just recently, it's been more muddled. But you put with it the Shoppers Drug Mart issue, where you can have symptomatic people going in now to be tested, which I think a lot of people will say, I don't want to go to Shoppers because of that. Even though, you're wearing a mask and you're going into that area. But the problem is now that it doesn't seem to be clear cut anymore. And I don't know, Dave, because maybe I'm not educated on what the ministry is trying to do with it, or the premier's office. But maybe they've just come to a decision that we're going to have to start living with this stuff. So this is the way it's going to be. I don't know why we're going to pharmacies.
Well, then say that out loud. At least say that out loud.
and I think some have said that we're going to have to start living with the new reality of it all. But it's even like when you can go to rinks in the city of Toronto, and you can go into change rooms, but they're only 50% full. Okay, well, honestly, I don't know how that cuts down the transmission when you've got a bunch of kids who are not wearing masks. You're either going to go inside and you're going to tie your skates up and take the risk, or you're going to go outside. But then, even then, if I go to Leaside Hockey Arena right now, it's like trying to get into the gold vault of the Knox. You're screened. It's only one person per child. It's all this, and yet I can go to a public rink, and it's kind of like, oh, well, as long as there's, only 50 people instead of 100 people in a room, we're okay. And I think this is where things are going to start to break down. Where if you need a test, go to a hospital or go to a certain part. Oh, now you can go to a more public space. You can't go here to skate with your kids, but you can go here as long as the room is reduced. There's a whole series of variables here, and this is where the public becomes confused over these things. And it's much to your point. Rod Phillips has got one ministry that says this, and then the hospital system has said that. The real issue with the hospital system, it seems to me, is what did the hospitals want? We still haven't got disclosure from the premier as to what all those letters said when they came back from that survey. And did all of them say we wanted all of these people vaccinated? So I'm not sure where this is headed, but I go back to your point. If you're going to say, look, we're going to have to start living with this, maybe that's the answer. But I don't know what it is right now.
So not to go off on too much of a tangent, but to pick up on that whole issue around the culture around arenas. The old boys and I are back in the rink and we're playing hockey, and which is great. We long time looked forward to it. But one of the guys found a piece that was written for the YorkRegion.com. And this is a hockey dad who is a coach who went into the arena, the local arena, and he brought a CO2 monitor. And he found that in the arenas that his kids are playing in, the CO2 levels are 8 times higher than what is recommended as being safe. And what that suggests to him is that there's a lot of stale air that we're breathing out is just getting recirculated in the arena. So it just becomes this petri dish. And the reason he was doing it is because it was a super spreader event, New York Region Men's Hockey League, that popped up. Well, how could that happen? So there's all kinds of science behind this that suggests, we're looking at it from the wrong end. So to your point, I mean, limiting the number of people in there is probably a good idea, but maybe we're seriously looking at the wrong end of it, which really comes down to the infrastructure that we need to be dealing with in so many places. And we don't hear, we hear about the HEPA filters in the schools, great, but there's so many other places where we're not hearing that. For example, you're going to have to set up a HEPA filter in Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, right?
The problem with the HEPA filter, and I know a little bit about this with full disclosure, because I've have people that have been talking about a new technology that's coming out of the United States. A HEPA filter just kind of moves air around. And this is
you need ventilation.
You need ventilation, or what's now coming out of the United States. It's being run in the Cleveland clinics. It's in surgical rooms. It actually runs, I think it's about $2,000 to plug it into a wall. It covers about 1,000 or 1,200 square feet. But what it does is it eliminates all of the contamination for SARS-2 plus all the other type of virus. I call it like a bug zapper. You put it in a room, you plug it in. They've now just approved them to be put in planes, trains, and buses. So you can see what's going to happen now. The new technology. So the evolution of the HEPA filter now moves to this next piece. The technology in the United States is just driving quicker and quicker and quicker to come up with smaller and smaller units that actually take the viruses out of places. So the quicker that they can get put onto buses and LRTs and into planes, or maybe not the planes, but into those places where people feel vulnerable, where people, in fact, like long-term care homes and schools and places like this, then we're more assured of it. And it's not just about the SARS-2. It's not just about COVID, but it's about all the other things. Because the issue, Dave, is not so much as we started to say at the top of the show on this, it's not just about COVID being in long-term care. It's not about the flu. It's about all those other things too, right? Because you would have had to have dealt with all of those things. So there's now technology that's starting to come up in the system. And I go back to this saying, this I think is the new normal. This is the new normal where you can see an underground restaurant system having a bunch of these in there that reduce, it doesn't eliminate it in certain circumstances, but try to eliminate as much as we can so we can get back to some kind of normal. But that requires a declaration at some point to say, this is what's going on, and this is why we're doing these things.
Ironically, though, for Canadians, bad air in hockey arenas has been an issue for decades.
Oh, yeah.
And has not been dealt with. I mean, it's in a community that doesn't have a hockey rink that has none has proper ventilation that we can find out. So there's an issue right there. If one benefit of the COVID evolution of new technologies is our rinks are safer places to be, that'll help every Canadian virtually. I mean, seriously, this is a big problem that has existed. We've all heard of people being, taken from arenas to hospitals in groups because of something circulated in the air, usually carbon monoxide. This is going to be good for arenas and for other public infrastructure, but how far behind are we in getting the infrastructure in place? I mean, how long did it take to get anything done in schools other than fans blowing stuff around?
Well, I talked to one of the guys who runs one of the arenas, and he said the problem is that really we're talking about air exchange, right? And I don't know enough about the science, but I've listened to the scientists talk about it. So the challenge in an arena is if you're running air exchange, well, that's terrific in February. But if you're trying to put ice in there in May or June, the air exchange doesn't work. So there's got to be other ways around it. But it occurred to me that, to John's point, that we need to be forward thinking on, if we're going to start talking about here's how we move forward, then the conversation should be about those forward thinking issues. And I don't necessarily think we're there yet. Maybe we're being a little impatient, but I don't think so. Listen, before we go, I want to get into this whole discussion about the inquiry into the Ottawa LRT. For those who pay a lot of attention to what's going on with the Toronto Transit, the crosstown is still slow. Some of the guys I'm talking to saying, except for the Eglinton station at Yonge Street, it's probably, soon ready to go. But they've had so many problems with the Eglinton station specifically. One of the guys that was involved in the project said, here's the issue. the way they built the original subway station at Yonge and Eglinton is not what's on the blueprint. And they discovered this more than 50 years later. So I realize that, the lens is on the LRT project in Ottawa. But Keith, holy cow. I mean, what the hell's going on? Like, at the end of this is a $9 billion project that got bogged down because, well, the plan doesn't match the way we built the place.
Well, you think they would have known that, because this is not an undeveloped area. In fact, that's just what always amazed me about that, is that this construction was going to go on with massive high-rise towers all around this intersection. So you're underpinning, you've got to really protect those areas while you're digging out, and now you're digging out and finding your blueprints don't match what you're digging out. Yeah. So, as you say, I'm no engineer. I don't even play one on TV, but I know that's trouble. And that's certainly going to delay a project. But how is there even, they're going to have an inquiry into the public inquiry into the Ottawa LRT. Sounds like it's absolutely necessary. The darn thing even derailed. I mean, you can't run in the winter very well. But this project, I don't know if that would serve any purpose here. Is one of those, let's just wait till everybody says at the end and tells us what they're actually going through. I mean, if they're literally digging blind around those massive high-rises, trying to construct the most up-to-date transit system underground, it's stunning work for them, but I don't know if there's ever going to be anyone to blame for what they've discovered here, right? Other than,
well, no, exactly. That's all historic stuff that was done back in the 60s. But at the same time, they made such an error based on the plan that they broke through the ceiling of the current subway station. And oh, geez, look what we found! It's a subway. You didn't know it was there. So it was that kind of thing. So all the more I think in the lens that is being shone on the LRT issues in Ottawa are all the more important. And for those of you kind of following along at home, this is not necessarily a government problem. This may well be at the heart of what is the public-private partnership. Now, a consortium of companies get together, and they have determined that they won the bid to build this thing, the Confederation line in Ottawa. But what's important to note is that most people look at these things and say, well, okay, it's just going to be, you put the shovels in the ground, you build it, you create the tunnels, blah, 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 and away you go. Well, in this case, the consortium is responsible for the design, the build, the finance, and the maintenance of this thing. So that maintenance contract typically lasts 25 or 30 years. So to your point, Keith, already it's fallen apart and they're arguing over the maintenance. So there's a real issue here.
There's a huge issue here. And it's very important because the province, as you know, is anteed up after changing its mind on the Hamilton LRT. LRTs have worked very successfully in KW. So they want to, get a handle on this before they start putting that Hamilton one in place. What has gone wrong in Ottawa? How could it be that apparently there was plenty of warnings from the experts, the staff that were overseeing this project? This train's not going to run well in winter. It's not Ottawa winter ready. And sure enough, it wasn't. I don't think anybody foresaw the derailment that put it out of service for I don't know how many weeks. But this is the kind of stuff that people, you're trying to get people onto a transit system and it's just completely unreliable. And then it's not even there for weeks on end. That a public inquiry is needed here. Is the problem at the P3 part of the process? That's what the New Democrats want us to believe, that the whole problem is with the P3 model of this. But there's got to be a lot more. Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, who wasn't told about the inquiry in advance, by the way, he's saying it's a maintenance issue. That he's blaming the maintenance yard on this. Well, do they need that much maintenance? It's still, as you say, it's a brand new system. This shouldn't be happening. So I think an inquiry is warranted, but I'm not sure, what are they going to be digging into? Are they looking to blame, or are they looking to make sure they get this thing on track and running again?
Well, two things, though, just to be clear. The 427 extension was delayed over arguments similar to this around maintenance vis-a-vis the P3 agreement. And just, again, for note, Eglinton Crosstown, a $9 billion P3. The Finch West LRT project in Toronto is another $2.5 billion P3. And there are reasons why, the Hurontario LRT, they're all P3s. there's a reason why the P3 makes sense, but it suggests to me, John, that government has kind of gone off and signed these deals without do they really understand what the public-private partnership model is?
Yeah, I guess when I reflect on these sort of things from a public opinion point of view, the default is to blame the government because the government is the one who signs off on all of this stuff. So if you look at the Ottawa situation, I mean, it's the Ottawa Council who's wearing this. They can point as much as they want to whether it's going through the appropriate engineered ground, where the actual tracks were supposed to go, or it's the actual vehicles, or it's maintenance. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the reliability to get people from one place to another, which is usually going to work or to going to shopping. And if you're going to invest billions of dollars in something and you can't go from point A to point B, well, then it's only one group of people who are going to get blamed for it. Although I don't know of any councils who have been, completely voted out the next election because of a transit issue. The second thing, though, is that we're now looking at a situation in Toronto, which are going to visit more urbanized centers from now on. And that is that the idea in Toronto, at least, especially at Yonge and Eglinton, where I live close by, was that at each subway stop going throughout the city, you would actually put more development around that area. So you'd sink lots of condominiums so that people would come down and get onto the subway. Of course, that creates crowding and pressure on the system anyways. But you're also dealing with, at that spot, one block north of that is where Montgomery's Tavern used to be. Montgomery's Tavern, where the Upper Canada Rebellion took place, where 1,600 British troops walked up and fought the guys right there back in, when the Great Compact was in place. You're dealing with areas that have been built upon for centuries, and you're going to run into problems. I don't have an issue with that. But to your point, Dave, it's critical that the P3s work together to make sure that they have as much information as possible. But at the end of the day, who do you end up blaming? Because I don't know the name of the consortium. I don't know necessarily the name of the company that made these transit vehicles, but I sure know the name of the local councillor, and I know the city of Toronto, who in fact gave their stamp that this would go forward with. So I think that's where it nets out on public opinion. It's a pretty muddled situation. That seems to be my word of the day, but all people want to do is get from one place to the other, and the only answerability on this is election day for local councillors.
Well, I just was going to, my years of spending with the P3 Council of Canada, I got to tell you that the folks at Infrastructure Ontario, the actual administrative part, they get this. They know what's going on here. But every time a new minister would come in, it was a completely new and Keith, you would have experienced this, new eye-opening. Oh, really? The education process started back at stage one. And it's the same thing at the municipal levels and the federal levels. So the muddledness happens in the political corridors for sure.
Oh, I remember the Liberals trying to give me a personal technical briefing on how they had a new alternative to the P3. It was just a P3 with a glorified enhancement. I can't even remember the name they came up with. And I said, that's just a P3 model. I don't need a tech briefing.
Alternate procurement funding.
There you go. That's it. Thank you, sir. You knew the name. And I said, that's the P3 model. You're just trying to get the NDP to support a different thing.
That's right.
And the NDP, of course, are always opposed to this. But governments, the P3 model is the way stuff gets built and has been certainly in the 21st century and, for a decade or so before that. P3 models are how governments get the financing now to get these things built. And as you say, to include in these contracts the maintenance, to keep it all in one place. That's smart government. And then penalties go to the...
Protects the asset.
Absolutely.
Right? On paper, it makes sense. But somebody in Ottawa clearly not reading the fine print on this paper. So I'm going to be curious to see how this plays out. John, I know you've got a bolt. You've got to get to one of your many meetings of the day. So glad you could sit in with us today, joining us from Ottawa. So, and Keith, good to talk to you from Nova Scotia. We're all over the place today.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the weekend. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics Podcast. It's an eye contact podcast.